Welcome to Practical Programming. This is going to be episode 5, and today we're going to talk about functions. So up until this point, you've mostly seen just typing out code, essentially. And it's not in anything, I'm just typing it in this window here. And so what you have to ask yourself is, well, that's really good, but what happens if you have a lot of it? And you have a lot of code, and you want to take that code and you want to encapsulate it into a nice, easy thing. Like, for example, let's say that I have a math equation that says A equals 5 times B plus C divided by D. And we're going to take all of this and we're going to raise it to the 5th power. Right? Now, this isn't so bad. It's really not. And let's say I define my A, B, and C. Say that A is equal to, or I don't want to define A. B is equal to 3, C is equal to 4, D is equal to 10. Right, if I run this, I print A, capital A, then I will get, hit the wrong button. I will get some number. There you go, 86, just a big number, right? Now, okay, this is all good, but what if I want to do this for lots of different B's, C's, and D's? What if I want to generalize this, right? And let's say I just want to have some way of saying, do math, B, C, D, and get A to be that, right? So I say I want A, and then I'm going to do math, B, D, and C. This would be called a function, okay? And so a function is a thing that takes an input. It doesn't have to, but usually it takes an input and produces some output, right? And so let's start with the most basic function we can think of. We're going to do a function that has no inputs and no outputs. So you start by typing the word def, and then the name of the function, my func, and then parentheses, and then here you're going to put what you intend to give the function to do stuff with. We're not going to give the function anything to do stuff with. Then we're going to put a semicolon and then hit enter. And you see here it's indented for me automatically. Anything that's indented will be part of the function. And so I have nothing in here. If I try to run this, it's going to complain. See, it doesn't like this, right? It doesn't know what to do with this. I need to get rid of this here too. There we go. So it doesn't know what to do with this. So if you want to have an empty, let's say for some reason, I don't know what the reason would be, but let's imagine you have a reason to have an empty function. You can type in this pass statement here, and then when I run it, you see there's no problems. So if I want an empty function that does nothing, I'll type pass, but we don't want that. So we want this to print hello there. So now if I come down here and I'm doing code, right? I'm coding. And I do my func, and it's called calling the function. I call the function, right? So first off, so see I ran this, nothing happened, right? But if I type my func now, look at that. It printed hello there. And then going back to our example with the ABCD, let's write a function do math. And you can have multiple functions. So def do math. And we're going to have inputs B, C, and D. And then a semicolon. And then what we're going to do is we're going to compute the number, my num, and then we're going to do something called return it. Return my num. What this means is send it back. Okay? Whatever called it, send it back. So now I can just do, I hit the insert key. 3, 4, 10. Okay, and now I don't need this. And I print A. Now when I run this, you see here I get the same number. So I've just taken all that code and then kind of put it away. And in PyCharm, we can actually minimize this. You can shrink it down. So now it's just kind of, it's a black box. That's the whole purpose of functions, is that they are a black box that lets us do stuff to variables. We want to do things with this, and what we want to do is we want to make our code look clean. We want to be able to just write one line of do math and have it give me back the right answer instead of typing this out every time. And that's the idea of the function. Now, you've noticed this one had no arguments. And then this one had 3 arguments. You can have 1 argument, 2 argument. They're called arguments. I should probably clarify that. The inputs, the things you give it, are called arguments, right? And I can write a function that has a specific number of arguments. So this one has 3, this one has 0. I can also do something interesting called a arbitrary number of arguments. So let's say I have my func2. What I would want to do is type star args. Okay. So what this is going to do is the star is a special character when I put it in a function. When I put it in the declaration of a function, this is called a declaration. I'm declaring to Python, hello, there is a function. When I put it in the declaration of a function, what I'm doing is I'm saying, I don't know how many arguments I want to put in yet. I know I'm going to put in some arguments, but we'll find out, right? And so the way that this would work is suppose I could do 2 or 3. What I can do is use an if statement and say if the length of arguments is 2, I'm going to do this code. And if the length of args is 3, I'm going to do this code. Now, okay, so first off, len, what does that mean? This is something that's used for lists. So if I have a list in Python, like we talked about in the previous video, if I have a list, if I type len, it will tell me how many items are in the list. That's all it is. So this is kind of interesting now. There's something going on here that's unique and you should pay attention to. I don't know how many inputs I'm going to put in here. Okay, so if I'm going to do something called indexing, where I do args at 4, for example, where I'm accessing the 4th element, or excuse me, the 4th element. It starts at 0, so this would be the 5th element. But so remember, Python, it starts at 0 when you're talking about lists and arrays and things like that. Okay, so if I do this and I don't know how many entries are in here, this is going to be a problem in the event that I pass too few, because we don't know how this might get used, because the idea is that this function is a black box. The person using it just types in arguments, and either it's a set number, which Python, a good IDE like PyCharm will tell you, or it will say star args, and that tells the coder, whoever's using this function, that I can put as many as I want. And so this function needs to be able to tolerate as many or as few arguments as you put in. So you have to put these if statements in here. There's also something called the try except block. I'm not going to cover that in this, but you need to check how many arguments are in this function call at any given time to make sure that you don't error. So let's run this though. So let's call my func and func2, and remember I can have as many args as I want. So let's do that. I do 2 and 2. So there you go. It was a short function. If I do 2, 2, and 1, so I'm passing 3 arguments. Long function. So you see it knew that there were 3 arguments. The last one is called keyword arguments. So def my func3. And you do this by saying star kwarg. Now you don't actually, so the interesting thing is I said star args and star kwargs. That's actually just convention. You don't have to do that. You could do thing, and then I just change this to thing, change this to thing, and this is empty, so I'm just gonna put pass in it. If I run this, you see it still runs long function, right? Because I have 3. So it doesn't have to be args. I did that because that's convention, and there's a lot of things in coding where it's just kind of like everybody does it, and so you do it. And this is one of those things. Everybody says args and kwargs. Whenever you use this double star, almost always they write kwargs. So let's suppose I have kwargs, right? Okay, well, what are kwargs? Well, kwargs means keyword arguments. It means that when I call the function, the person who calls the function is going to give me names for these variables. So let's say I have variables, entry 1. So you access them by doing kwargs, brackets, and then the name of that entry. So let's say I say print kwargs at entry 1. All right, so if I call this function now, what it would look like is I would say entry 1 equals, and you see, okay, this is why we're using PyCharm. Again, entry 1. PyCharm detected that one of my kwargs is entry 1. It knows. It goes, I see what this function is doing. So it tells me, you can use this. And you see it's going to color code it this dark red color. That means that I can use it, and I'm good to go. So if I say, hello world, okay, and I call this, you see I get long function, and then I get hello world because that's what I passed as entry 1, and I'm printing whatever entry 1 is, and then I get what A was. Now I can have more than just entry 1. I can make up as many potential inputs as I want. Now the catch is, you better make sure that those are provided, and you need to use if statements and try except statements to make sure that any input that gets provided actually exists. So let's see what happens if I do entry 2 and I print that. And let's say I don't provide. So I'm the coder and I just provide entry 1. What will this do? Oh no, key error, entry 2. Well, I was going to print something called entry 2, but when I called the function, I never called entry 2. And as a programmer who's using this out in the real world, I might not know that you want an entry 2. Of course, I'll see it when I try to run my code and it won't work. But there's something going on here. So now I got to type entry 2 and hello world again. Right? So now it works. But this is kind of, so these two, I would call these two more advanced function types. When you first get started, stick with these. Just do functions that have defined input numbers. If I don't provide all the inputs to this, it won't run. There's no ambiguity about how many inputs there could be. This one doesn't have any inputs, so it's very simple. And I would really caution you against using these arg and kwarg type functions when you first learn Python. You can use them in packages, and we're going to look at some functions in NumPy and in pandas and a few others that we look at that do have kwargs in them. But you have to be careful when you yourself are writing them, because the people who wrote pandas and NumPy, they have all those checks I was talking about to make sure that if you don't provide it, they're not trying to access a keyword argument that you didn't provide, or if you do provide it, they are accessing it. And there's some tricks to do that. But overall, this pretty much covers functions in general. I guess I should talk a bit about scope. So let's say I have something called, I'll call this a local variable. So we'll say x equals 10, right? If I call do math, okay, you might think, well, x equals 10 here. So now I have this variable called x equals 10. You don't. So if I try to do print x, right? So I've got x up here, right? I'm calling do math first, and then I'm establishing x. Now I'm going to print x. And you can already see PyCharm doesn't like this. Name x is not defined. Why? Because I declared it here, right? So, and I called the function, so I have it, right? I have x. No. So x is called a local variable, and there's something called scope. So what scope means is that this variable only exists inside of this section of the code, inside this function. Once this return statement executes, the x is gone. There is no more x. I can print x from within here. So if I run this, if I get rid of this, and I run this again, now I can print x. You see I got 10. So I can print x inside of it, but I cannot access x outside of it. That's because the scope of x is the do math function. You cannot look at the x variable outside of the do math function. And so that's kind of a short introduction on scope. So the do math function can only see outside of it what you give it. Right? Do math is not aware of any variables in here. So if I do y equals 100, and then inside of here I try to print y, actually, hold on. Let's see what happens. So it does work. So it does work in reverse, apparently. So many languages do not work like this. And I actually haven't tried it because this is really bad practice. Don't do this. Make sure that all the variables you're using in a function exist in the function. But if you declare this out here, actually no, this does make sense. If you declare this out here, it's what's called a global, and so its scope is everything. It's everything in the file. If you declare it inside of a function, the scope is local to the function. And so scope can get you into weird trouble if you're not careful about it. But just know if you establish a variable inside of a function, you can't access it outside the function. And if you establish a variable outside of a function in the same file as the function, you can access it because it's called a global. That covers pretty much everything. There's something known as recursion, where you call a function inside of itself. So you take the function, and while the function runs, you call the function again. It's a pretty advanced topic, and it's really only used, well, I say only, it's used pretty frequently for some pretty interesting problems. For practical programming, I would not expect you to need to use recursion, let me put it that way. And since this is a practical programming course, I'm not going to cover recursion. So that covers functions, and now that we've covered functions, I'm going to cover objects. And once I've covered objects, we're ready to look at arrays. I know I said we were going to do arrays last time, but I realized there's a lot of calling functions involved and using object properties inside of most of the packages for arrays. So we'll look at that. We'll look at objects next, and then once we've looked at objects, we'll be good to look at NumPy arrays and other things. So I will see you in the next episode.